Hello, welcome to Scrap Time. My name's Christine, and in this video I'm going to be featuring the Tim Holtz Distress Watercolor Pencils. I'm going to show you how I use them dry and how I use them wet. And I have got one set. This is set number 2. You can see the colors listed here in the set. So when I start to use them, I like to open it upside down. It makes it easier to use the pencils rather than getting them out of the little thing here. And of course I'm working on a watercolor paper because I will be applying water to them even though I'm starting with a dry application. So the pencils are solid pigment. They're woodless. You can see here, this is more of like a plasticky finish, so you can get them wet without any trouble. So I'm going to just start by coloring them on. Now the good thing of using pencils versus an ink is because you have more control over where you're applying the pigment. And these are different than the crayons. The crayons were more sort of they weren't waxy, but they had a different texture, whereas you can see this is a firmer application. Now I'm going to mix a bit of color in there. I'm going to add, this is prize ribbon. I didn't start with prize ribbon because prize ribbon is quite dark, and I wanted the lighter color to come through. But then I'm also going to add in some cracked pistachio. So the other good thing with the pencils is you can blend them ahead of time like this. Now I could just go with a paintbrush, and if you go with a paintbrush you'll get exact color, but because I like it to sort of bleed out, I'm going to go in with a bit of water spray. And then that, you can see how the color has gone out there, and that's what I like, how the color bleeds. I'm going to go back into this, but first I'm going to dry it so I get sort of that bleeding in place. So it's not quite dry, but for me at this point it's good enough. I'm going to go in with a paper towel and take some of that away and wipe the water off my mat. So of course you could leave it like that, but what I'm going to do now is go back in with more color. And it's a little damp, so you'll see the colors going on a little wetter than the first time I applied the color. A bit of more of the green. So this time I'm going to just spritz my mat and take a paintbrush and just now paint it out. And so this is what I mean, you can get more exact coloring. I just like to have that sort of bleeding of the color, so that's a technique I do. Now if you don't want the bleeding of the color, you could just color it on and get a paintbrush that matches. If you're doing a small area, you want a small paintbrush. I could use a bigger paintbrush for this area. And there I sort of have a bit of color down there with that bleeding. And I've made a card, I'll show you, that's similar. It was a bit less color, but I made a Christmas card. And I just put a strip of color, but you can see the bleeding off the side. And to me, that's just a personal preference. As I said, if you don't want that effect, then just apply your color and paint it out with a paintbrush. So now I'm going to show you a second technique. And this is when you use the pencil crayon wet. So I'm going to use red because I want to make a Christmas card with it. Now, of course, you can have a cup of water and just dip it in, which is easier, but because I have cats, I don't like to have cups of water because they like them as well, and they like to knock them over. So I just use a spritz. So now that it's wet, I'm basically painting the color on, and you'll get different levels. I'll be able to get like thin, and then as I do it, I can get thicker. You can get the crayon-y. There, I got some of that thicker. I'm going to spritz it more. And you're just activating that color beforehand. And it gives you a whole different way to use the pencil crayons. So for people who like to be very exact with their coloring, I would probably just do the dry method. But for people who like to experiment and see what can we get out of the pencils, then doing the wet technique sort of gives you a bit more. You don't know what you're going to get, and it gives you more experimentation with them. So sort of like that. I can sort of rub off some of that excess, so now you can see here I'm getting some thick bits. And then I just leave it out to dry on its own. And then I'm going to turn this into a card similar to this in the next video, where I show you some of the new products from Ideology for Christmas from Tim Holtz. So if you want to see what this turns out, you want to tune into our next video. But that gives you two ways to use the pencil crayons. You can get completely different looks, and there's many more ways to use the pencil crayons. These are just two sort of introductory basic ways to use it dry, then adding water, or using it already wet. Now, I could still spritz this and the color will still bleed. So as I said, there's many, many ways. You just have to experiment with how you like to create and what you like to make. And I'm sure you'll come up with great ways to use these pencil crayons. They are currently in 3 sets in 36 colors currently available, but something tells me in the future there'll be more sets available. Thanks for watching. Be sure to give our video a thumbs up and subscribe to Scrap Time Videos on YouTube. In the meantime, here are a couple of the videos you might be interested in watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.